Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Today, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 5931, the Prohibiting Future Ransom Payments to Iran Act. H.R. 5931, I believe, makes it clear that the Obama administration violated longstanding U.S. policy by releasing prisoners and paying ransom for the return of American hostages held by Iran. This legislation prohibits in law all cash payments to Iran and demands transparency on any future settlements with Iran to ensure that they are not used to pay ransom. The head of the Justice Department's National Security Division warned that Iran would see this as a ransom and respond by taking more hostages. And that's exactly what happened. Even President Obama, in a presidential policy directive issued last year, stated that U.S. policy against paying ransom or offering other concessions, quote, protects U.S. nationals and strengthens national security by removing a key incentive for hostage takers to target U.S. nationals, thereby interrupting the vicious cycle of hostage taking. I believe that this was a clear case where the president violated his own words and terms. Chairman Royce, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I share your concern and desire to protect and prevent Americans from ransom payments to the world's leading sponsor of state terrorism. And I'd like to welcome you and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, to be our first panel, hearing your summaries and testimonies. And I want you to know that without objection, both of you, anything you have in writing will be into the record. And before we get to both of you, I'd like to defer time to the gentleman from Massachusetts for an opening statement. The gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very brief. I have a very different assessment of the situation than the one that you just outlined. I think the administration has made it clear that the money that you're talking about that was paid to Iran was not ransom. This was money already owed to Iran and settled in a separate negotiation, unrelated to the nuclear deal or to the hostage situation. And I think I think that this effort here is yet another attempt by the majority to kind of bring bills to the floor to, I guess, to express their I don't know if they're disagreement, or maybe they're just upset that the Obama administration had a success here in terms of preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons without going to war, which I think is a pretty big deal. But let's be clear about what this is. This is a one-chamber messaging bill. It's not going anywhere in the other chamber. And this is kind of the pattern that we've kind of gotten into here in these last weeks. So rather than dealing with the Zika crisis, rather than dealing with Flint, Michigan, rather than dealing with gun violence, rather than dealing with keeping the government open, we're doing this kind of stuff. And you're in charge, and you guys can do whatever you want. But I think I wanted the record to understand how we interpret what this action is. And with that, I welcome our witnesses, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate and would suggest the gentleman that I think he's right in some regards, and that is it is a very difficult thing to weigh and measure. And without transparency and people being forthright and honest and open about what they're trying to do and the reasons why they're trying to do things, to at least members of Congress in a private opportunity to meet with chairman and ranking members to where we all get the same message, then these kinds of things are going to occur. And when you fail to notify Congress of what you're doing and why, you can expect these things to happen. And this administration has a 7 and some year really track record of operating on their own and then asking for somebody to cover basis for them later rather than the transparency that would be required as an opportunity for the President of the United States to seek, an opportunity for people to see with the same vision that that President has the way things should be done. So I appreciate the gentleman very much. Mr. Royce, we're delighted that you're here. You come with the process of not only experience, but also being the chairman of a committee. You also come with the experience of looking at things deeply, measuring 3 times and sawing once, and I'm delighted the gentleman's here, and the gentleman's now recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, members. I mean, the main focus here going forward at this point is to make certain that we don't have more cash payments. We do not want to see ourselves in a situation where you end up with cash on pallets going to the Iranian regime because of the concern on our part of where that money is going to end up. And I hope the committee will grant an appropriate rule for the consideration of this measure on the House floor. And I'll just go back through history, regardless of how we perceive this. I will just restate what happened. Simultaneous with the implementation of the Iran nuclear agreement in January, the President also announced that the United States would pay Iran $1.7 billion to settle a dispute over an abandoned arms sale that stalled when the radicals that rule Iran seized power back in 1979. And this process in which we had ongoing hearings with the administration, I just have to tell you, this settlement payment came out of the blue. And the payment of this settlement concurrent with the delivery of 4 Americans who we thought were being exchanged for 9 Iranian prisoners, it became pretty obvious that this was a demand that the Iranians had made for cash. What we didn't know at the time was that this was not going to be the only cash payment, that in total there would be $1.7 billion transferred in cash. And that's what this bill tries to do, is end once and for all the process of paying Iran in cash. Now, the White House rejected concerns that this payment amounted to a ransom for the simultaneous release of American hostages. But I would just point out that you have Iranian military commanders at the time on video, on their television stations, announcing that this was going to happen and basically claiming that that's what it was. And last month, when news broke that the U.S. secretly paid Iran the first part of this settlement, $400 million in cash, just as the hostages were released, it became clear also that the President had rejected the advice from his own Justice Department. Justice explained that if you do this way, if this is perceived as ransom, the problem is that Americans will be at risk of being abducted in the future. Since this agreement, we've had 3 more Americans now held in Iran, plus 1 Canadian, 1 Brit, and 1 Frenchman. So basically, the administration ignored a long-standing U.S. policy not to release prisoners or pay ransom in exchange for the return of Americans held hostage abroad. Even the State Department now admits this payment was, in their words, leverage for the release of American hostages. So after weeks of questions from Congress and the press corps, the administration finally admitted that in addition to this $400 million, we had a total of $1.3 billion of compromise interest, also paid in cash on pallets loaded onto cargo planes. Not surprisingly, Iran has since continued its terrorism and its money laundering in the region, and we have a vested interest here, having passed the anti-Hezbollah funding resolution, which shut down the easy transfer of cash to Hezbollah, or I should say of banking assets to Hezbollah, to make sure that now that transfer isn't done directly with cash, with unmarked bills. And so explicit provisions in existing regulations allow financial institutions to provide payment to Iran through conventional banking channels. And when those payments are made pursuant to a settlement agreement under the Iran-U.S. Claims Tribunal, as they supposedly were here, you are supposed to do it through those banking channels. So the administration could have licensed a transaction through the international financial system. It might have taken a little more work, but it might not have been time for the release of these hostages, but it could have been done. Indeed, this weekend, the Treasury Department finally confirmed that other recent transactions with Iran, as you know, we've had a number of these, were conducted through traditional banking channels. This one was not, because that's what the Iranians apparently demanded. So, when you're dealing with untraceable assets like this into the hands of the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, it's time for Congress, I think, to step in and say, no more cash. The international body charged with developing policies to combat money laundering and terrorism tells us that, quote, physical transportation of currency is one of the main methods used to move criminal assets, launder money, and lastly, and most importantly, finance terrorism. Indeed, I believe that's why Iran wanted the cash. It's not a coincidence to me that this desire for cash comes just as the committee's legislation to crack down on banks that finance Hezbollah is having an impact in the region. So this legislation, which passed out of the Foreign Affairs Committee last week, has two core elements. One, it prohibits future cash payments for any reason to Iran until Iran stops sponsoring terrorism. If they want to stop doing that, then we can transfer cash. And is no longer a primary money laundering concern. And two, it demands transparency and advance notification of any future settlements related to the U.S.-Iran Hague Tribunal so that the committee is not surprised when it comes to these large payments. And finally, I'll note that I've submitted an amendment for consideration by the committee. At last week's markup, the ranking member expressed concerns that the bill, as introduced, was too broad in our attempt to end payments in cash and cash-like equivalents. At the markup, I committed to sharpening this language as the process moves forward. The amendment I've submitted makes good on that commitment using the more precise term monetary instrument, which is already defined in U.S. law, while also adding precious metals, a real concern among Iran watchers. Chairman Sessions, this is a reasonable piece of legislation that strikes the right balance between ending cash payments to a state sponsor of terrorism on the one hand, while ensuring we can live up to our international commitments on the other. It poses a fundamental question. Are we comfortable providing Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, that's fueling a bloodbath in Syria and supporting Hezbollah and has supported Hamas, are we comfortable with billions of dollars in cash being transferred to them that they can turn around and funnel? I would say it's time to end the capability of the Iranian regime to do that, and so I urge that you bring it up under the rule.
Chairman Royce, thank you very much. Mr. Engel, we're delighted that you're here at the Rules Committee today, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me first say, with respect for my dear friend Chairman Royce, I have to oppose the legislation. As I've said again and again, I think we need to be tough on Iran. Everyone knows I voted against the Iran deal. We need to ensure, though, that the deal is fully enforced and that Iran comes up with its end of the bargain and has to produce. We need to crack down on the regime for supporting terrorism, building missiles, suppressing the rights of the Iranian people. The list goes on and on. And I also have problems with the way the payments to Iran were carried out. But frankly, Mr. Chairman, I think this focus on pallets of cash is an optics problem more than anything else. Money is money. It's fungible. This payment was Iran's money, whether we like it or not. There will be more payments under the commitment we made in 1981 under President Reagan with the Algiers Accords. President George H.W. Bush sent money to Iran under those accords as well. And once money is in Iran's bank account, whether we send it by check, cash, money order, or electronic funds transfer, there's no way to trace what happens to it next. My chief concern is that, with respect to this payment, Congress wasn't fully briefed or notified. Mr. Chairman Sessions, I agree with you. You said at the beginning that notification and transparency are key, which is exactly the approach I've taken with my amendment. So again, we didn't know ahead of time that these payments would be in cash. If we had, members would have had the chance to ask questions or voice concerns. We almost certainly wouldn't be sitting here 8 months later legislating on this narrow point. We're a co-equal branch of government. We have an oversight role to play. I share Chairman Royce's concern about this. So during the markup, I offered an amendment in the nature of a substitute. My measure would have required that the administration notify Congress at least 5 days in advance of any claim settlement agreement or payment to Iran, to any other state sponsor of terrorism, or to North Korea. It would give us a chance to weigh in and clear up any confusion. It would make sure lawmakers know when and how these payments happen before they happen. In my view, if the majority had invited Democrats to collaborate on drafting this bill, we would have ended with something that resembled my legislation. We've been doing this for the past 4 years. We could have tinkered with the notification period. We could probably have even found some common ground on the cash issue. I think working across the aisle, we would have wound it up a lot closer to my amendment and to the underlying bill, but we weren't given that chance. So it turns out that the biggest sticking point is the word ransom. My amendment would have stripped out the 6 times the word is used in this bill, including in the title and the findings. Now, whether you think the payment to Iran was ransom or not, we all know that including this word in the bill again and again and again turns this legislation into a political hot button. It turns it into an attempt to embarrass the administration. Frankly, I disagree with the administration on a lot of Iran policy, but I'm not interested in embarrassing them. So we're left with something that seems very political. 50 Republican co-sponsors to this bill, no Democrats. No Democrats were asked to participate in putting the bill together. It's not the way we usually do business on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and that's why I oppose the bill, and I ask that my amendment be made in order so that members have the opportunity to vote on a more balanced approach to this problem. I still think there's time left to make this a constructive and bipartisan piece of legislation. Again, Chairman Royce and I have worked closely together on many things. And some changes, let me say, that in the bill that passed the Foreign Affairs Committee and today, some changes were made, and there were some amendments from other people. I think most of that for the better, but for me, it's not good enough. So I would respectfully say, let's put our heads together, let's come up with a bipartisan piece of legislation that doesn't seem political in this election year, that doesn't seem like it's up there to embarrass the administration, that actually will allow Congress to function, because we need to be notified. And we extended it so it's not just Iran, it's North Korea or any country, and I think that's very, very important. So I thank you for the opportunity to testify. I thank Chairman Royce, whom I've worked closely together with for the past 4 years, and I respectfully ask that my amendment be made in order.
Mr. Engel, thank you very much. The opportunity for members today to hear the story, I think, is important, and I will say to both of you that I believe that we've got to find a way to make sure that any administration, notwithstanding the current one that is not up for re-election, be held accountable to the wishes of this body. And I don't know the right way to get at it, but I will tell you that I would hope that at some point in the future, whether this does or does not move anywhere, it would be my hope that at least after this election, when we're through that period of time that people would say is used for political gain, I would hope that between the two of you, and I'm not admonishing you as just one member here speaking, would find more common ground. I happen to believe this administration could have cared less and probably, in my opinion, did do what the accusation is. And the evidence of that is the lack of being forthright. When people do not act in a forthright manner, that is what is called in the intelligence community a deceptive indicator, known as a DI. And I have watched the president and his administration in this endeavor now for about 1.5 years, and I believe that they have a deceptive indicator or a reason to deceive the American people, and that is why I support what Mr. Royce is doing. Now, that's my own personal opinion. I don't think I'm the only one that shares that opinion, but I do have that opinion. I would like to find a way that both of you, just like people challenge me a lot, to find a way to make sure this does not happen under any circumstance moving forward after this gameplay is over of the November election. So that's my own point back to both of you. People can share their own opinions. That's mine to both of you, and thank you very much. Chairman Cole?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I actually have no questions.
Thank you very much. Chairman yields back his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Well, I'm going to do everybody a favor, given the fact that I do think this is a one-chamber messaging bill that's unfortunately not a bipartisan bill and is not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to ask any questions. I think we should be focused on other things, as I said, but you guys are in charge and you get to drive the agenda. But I do think, I do think we should be occupied with other more pressing things right now, and this is not one of them.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. You're back.
Yes, sir. Judge Hastings?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
To both the members that I have great respect for, thank you for being here. I have a concern that I'm sure must have been discussed between you all as well as the committee, and that is, whose money was this that was paid to Iran? Was it Iranian money or was it U.S. money?
The argument that the administration makes in this case is that there was a prepayment on the part of the government in Iran before the fall of that government in 1979 of $400 million. And so extrapolating interest from that, and as a result of the tribunal's recommendation, and this was brought late to the tribunal, or conceded to by the U.S. at the 11th hour, their argument is that this coincidentally coincides with the transfer of the American hostages on that day.
Right.
Our actual argument with this is at this point, or mine, is at this point just with the payment of cash. And the reason I'm making that argument, the reason I'm trying to end that practice, is because these cash transactions, according to the Financial Action Task Force, which is the international body for global standards, they say the last thing you want to do is do any of these transactions in cash, because that's a physical cross-border transportation of currency then that could be used by Iran at a time when everyone else is trying to control the Iranian regime through sanctions, even though we're beginning to lift them, but control them so that they cannot finance Hamas and Hezbollah. Mm-hmm. So that's the crux of the problem from my perspective, and that's the history.
Then let me continue the argument from yet another perspective. If it was Iran's money in the final analysis, if we had paid it, as was the case on implementation day and the release of all these persons, if we had paid it the day after or a month after or a month before, would your argument be the same?
My argument would be to the same point. The payment should not, and that's what the bill says, the payment should not be made in Swiss francs and unmarked euros, in other words, in cash. And the reason is the same. Because now we know there were three tranches, the total 1.7 billion. And so for all of our efforts against the Quds forces and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, in terms of their easy funding of terror finance, everybody's on the same page internationally, or at least the Western financial system is, in trying to shut this down. This represents a way to circumvent that process. That's what I'm trying to cut off for future payments, because I believe there probably will be future payments, and they shouldn't be made in cash. And that's my point, Judge.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you and I were not in Congress at the time that the Algiers Accord was struck. Correct me if I'm wrong. Insofar as the tribunal itself is concerned, all American claims have been paid. Where does the difference enter the picture? Is it just on the fact that it was cash money? Or do we, in some respects, frame this as ransom money, and then at the very same time be flying in the face of the accords that caused the International Tribunal to come into existence in the first place?
See, this bill does not in any way withdraw the U.S. from the tribunal. What this bill requires the administration to do is be transparent with Congress and about how it engages with the tribunal. If future settlements are truly a good deal for American taxpayers, the requirement should be an asset, not a burden, right? But it should not be made in cash. So I have limited the language in the bill simply to, not prevent paying the tribunal award or settlement, but just prevent it from being paid in cash for the reason that the Justice Department has raised, and that the international standard-setting organization that is trying to force Iranian compliance on terror finance have suggested, and that's why the bill reads the way it does.
Well, my understanding of the tribunal is it could be paid by wire, check, or cash, but your argument is that it shouldn't be paid in cash.
That is correct.
This is totally irrelevant in terms of this particular measure, but I can't help but point out that billions of dollars in cash walked off in Iraq that we still don't know where it went. And cash is the currency of the realm, and the U.S. dollar is still the currency of the realm. And I think the administration made the case that the Iranians could not be involved in the banking system but for the fact that they had U.S. cash. If they had paid it in Swiss francs or in Russian rubles or something, it wouldn't have been the same.
But Judge Hastings, we were in the process of transferring about $700 million a month to Iran and lifting the sanctions, and we were doing that through check in order to comply. So my point is, this was withheld from us in Congress, and it was the wrong choice in terms of how to do it. We had the other way to do it.
Right. The one thing that I do feel very strongly about, and you may or may not know, I think Elliot does, that I voted against the Iran deal.
Yeah.
So I have the same concerns that you do. I continue, as late as day before yesterday, arguing before a group that there are things about this agreement that need to be paid attention to. We are now, if my recollection is, we're in the third side agreement that most members in here had no idea of the substance of those. I've also argued and will continue to argue that Iran is not likely to be adherents to the structure. But there are several things. I think we have to be mindful that we're not the only players that are involved here. This was an agreement with other international actors, and that becomes something to pay attention to, because when I hear the political discourse, one of the candidates says that the day he's in office, he'll tear this agreement up. Well, if he tore that agreement up, that would tear us apart in international affairs. And I want to make clear that it's not that simple. I understand your argument. It has currency. The Democrats on the committee did have dissenting views, and Mr. Chairman, most respectfully, I ask unanimous consent that the dissenting views of the Foreign Affairs Democrats, led by Mr. Engel, be made a part of.
With that objection, that'll be a part of the record.
Thank you, Mr.
Judge.
Chairman. Mr. Engel, of the dialogue that just took place, do you have any added contribution?
Well, let me say that, we cannot ban all payments to Iran, because that would violate the Algiers Accords, and so it really doesn't make a difference, in my view, if it's cash or wire transfer. Once it gets to Iran, we can't track it. And of course, money's fungible and things can always happen, so I don't worry about whether it's cash or not. I just feel that there are legitimate concerns that can best be addressed, as it always is, if we work in a bipartisan way and put our heads together. And if it wasn't the case, it seems to me this is more intent in trying to embarrass the administration than it is to get at a problem that I acknowledge exists. Not that there's no problem, it exists. So we put our heads together, we come up with it, because in the future, we don't know who's going to be president. We want to make sure that Congress, as a co-equal branch of government, is not just disregarded. And my experience in being here a long time is that we've had Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, both of whom, all of whom, many of whom, think that Congress shouldn't play any role in foreign policy, and that we should just go along with what they do. And that's, of course, not our role, and regardless of who the president or what party that president comes from. So I think that there are some issues here that are important, and I hope we can get beyond the election campaign and get beyond a few more months, and then put our heads together and try to come up with a plan that takes in the best parts of both bills.
Well, I associate myself with your remarks, and one of the things that I've learned over the course of time here is very often the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and it's kind of unnecessary. I don't think Chairman Royce or any other member here or in this body are any more concerned than you and I are about the reconstitution of Hezbollah or Hamas or any other terrorist acts, particularly the awesome circumstances that are being perpetuated in Syria. Toward that end, it would seem to me similar to the Affordable Health Care Act. I think our better view as bipartisan efforts would be to do what's necessary to fix health care in America. And same would be here, whether one agreed or disagreed, as I did, with the Iranian JCPO. The fact of the matter is, if we were working together, and that holds, and Chairman Royce's point is well taken, that holds with the administration as well. Had they been sitting down with the two of you and your staffs, had their staffs been doing that in the run-up to all of this, the likelihood is that we wouldn't be in this position. But as Mr. McGovern said, this is a one body message, and that seems to be what we're going to do until we get a continuing resolution from the Senate and get out of here whenever we get out of here. But in the meantime, we should be doing these things together, and in international affairs, perhaps as much or more in some cases than some of our domestic affairs. We're going to have to put this partisanship aside, or else we're going to wind up with our ship sinking, period. Yeah,
If I might, when I come home, which is every week, I have more and more people in my district saying to me, why don't you guys get together? Why don't you work together? Yeah. Why, people, I think, want us to work together. Ed and I have tried to do that on the Foreign Affairs Committee before.
And you've done a good job.
We've been largely successful, and I hope that we could set an example for the rest of the Congress. People can put their heads together and find common ground for the benefit of the country. And
I thank you.
I hope we wind up doing that with this as well.
Thank you, and I thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yes, sir, and I thank the gentleman from Florida. Does Republicans seek time? The gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you very much. I was listening to the discussion. I do have tremendous respect for both you gentlemen. This is a very important committee, and you take it seriously. You're very smart men. You're committed to your job, and it's always impressive to have you here. Mr. Engel, I did hear you say that there might be some motivation to embarrass the administration. I want to assure you that is not my motivation. I think the administration has embarrassed itself, and I don't think they're incapable of understanding embarrassment. So I think it would be futile on my point or anybody else's point to try to do something to embarrass them, because I don't think you can embarrass them. So that is not my point. I think the actual basis for this legislation was well stated by the chairman, and a lot of us agree with him. I think the vast majority of Americans agree with him based upon some polling that I've seen. But you said something, Mr. Engel, that did concern me. You said that this is a matter of optics. And you know far more about the Middle East than I do. I'm relatively new to learning these things, but I've been over there, I've talked to people, and I don't know of any other part of the world where optics matter more. I mean, people, both friend and foe alike, see things like this and they judge us. They judge our willingness to show strength. They judge our willingness to be good allies. They judge our willingness to be effective adversaries. And it seems to me this is exactly the wrong optic to send to both our allies and our adversaries. And I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to that, because I have such respect for your opinion.
Well, optics in terms of whether it's cash or not. To me, that's really not important. I think we have to follow the Algiers Accords. And so you know, the bill mentions ransom 6 times. You know, to me, that's a poke in the eye of the administration. And the question is, do we want to try to fix a problem, or do we want to poke the administration in the eye? And to me, that's optics, whether it's cash or not cash. Again, money is fungible, things are fungible. Some of these things are irritating, no doubt, but I would rather concentrate on the more important points, and that is that any administration should not take Congress for granted. And requiring a notification, I think, is something that would change that. And to me, that would be important, not to use the word ransom 6 times and try to drag down the administration. That's what I meant by optics. And I would do that, by the way, for any administration. I would defend the rights of this body to be a co-equal branch of government. And you know, when we go around the world and we meet with other parliamentarians, it's a strange concept to them that we're a co-equal branch of government. They have to always answer to the executive. Well, we don't have to do that. And I am annoyed that we did not have notification. That's what irks me the most. And there are some legitimate things. But the way you go about it, and the way we've done this tremendously for the past 4 years on the committee, is to put our heads together, find common ground, and then work together. The bill has 50 Republican co-sponsors. To my knowledge, I know I wasn't asked, and the Democrats weren't asked. And it seems to me if you want to really solve a problem, then you try to do bipartisan collaboration. If you want to make a political point and poke someone in the eye, then you do what was done here. And that's all I'm saying about optics.
Well, you have a problem with the use of the word ransom, but if I understand some of the polling I'm seeing, the vast majority of the American people see this as ransom and find the administration's argument that it was, quote, leverage, close quote, to be laughable. And I'm going to tell you, from my point of view, it's not laughable. It's disgraceful that they would try to use a word like that, thinking somehow that they're going to fool the Congress and the American people that this was anything but ransom when the money's paid and the hostages are let go. And guess what? They've taken more hostages. We simply encourage them to do that. Let me ask you a hypothetical. And I have tremendous respect for you, Mr. Engel. I wouldn't be asking these questions if I didn't.
When someone says they have tremendous respect for you, that's when you got to brace for what's coming next.
I mean every word of it.
Whether it's Alabama or New York.
I mean every word of it. I mean every word. I was in New York City just the other day. Love being there. Suppose...
Call me next time you're in, we'll go for lunch.
I will. Oh, I promise you to do that.
Okay.
Let me pose a hypothetical to you. Mr. Trump wins the election, and he's president of the United States, and he sends pallets of cash to Vladimir Putin, pursuant to a valid agreement, but he sends pallets of cash to Vladimir Putin. How would you feel about that?
Well, first of all, you should ask me how I feel about Mr. Trump.
No, sir, I'm asking you, no, it's a serious
Pick me up
question.
from the floor.
No, Mr. Engel, this is a serious question.
Yeah.
How would you feel about that?
How would I feel? I feel very strongly, and anyone who knows me knows I take foreign policy very seriously, and I think the United States ought to be a strong leader, and the United States ought not to kowtow to people like the Iranians or Putin or others that are our enemy. Frankly, it's one of the reasons I'm afraid of Donald Trump, because he seems to think Putin's our friend.
Well, it seems to me that Mr. Obama thinks Iran's our friend, and Iran is not our friend. And this transaction seems to indicate that he thinks it's okay to send them pallets of cash. So I want to ask you again,
Look,
how would you feel if President Trump sent Russia pallets of cash?
Look, Iran is not our friend, or the Iranian government is not our friend, and the Russian government is not our friend, and I don't like sending pallets of cash or anything else to people who are not our friends. But when there are accords, again, the Algiers Accords, signed under President Reagan, done in the past, followed in the past by President George H.W. Bush, the money we send to Iran is not much different than what George H.W. Bush did. It may be galling to us. You know, we waited till those people were released before we released the money. So people say, well, that's ransom. Well, it would have been worse the other way. If they had released the money first, while the hostages, or whatever you want to call them, were still controlled by the Iranian government, that would have been worse. So I think we withheld the money to ensure that those people would be released. Now, it galls me because I don't like the Iranian government. I voted against the Iranian deal. But we sign international treaties, and we just can't, because it's a new administration, rip them up and say, well, we don't like it, we're not going to do it. You have to, as you know, follow what has already been done. So there are lots of things that I don't like that are done. There are lots of international treaties and agreements that I would change if I could. But once the American government signs it, it's part and parcel of what it is. So all I'm saying is there are some legitimate concerns raised here, and I agree with them. It's not illegitimate. I just think we do better in this Congress if we put our heads together and work across the aisle and try to come to a solution. So it doesn't matter, frankly, who the president is, whether it's a Democrat or Republican. I don't want any administration stepping on the toes of this Congress.
And I think I heard you say that you don't like the fact that we're sending or thinking about sending pallets of cash to our enemies.
I don't like it, but if there's an agreement, if there's...
That was my question.
If there's look, there are lots of things I don't like, but there are agreements that we sign, and we have to abide by those agreements that were signed by previous administrations.
There was nothing in this agreement that required him to send pallets of cash. Nothing. He could have done it other ways. And that has been proven that we did do it other ways.
Well, can you explain to me the big deal, the big difference? To me, I don't like the fact that we would send Iran any money, but we're obligated to do so under the treaty.
Why do
So it
people
doesn't
send
seem to
cash?
matter to me whether it's cash or not. I think it's, frankly, a semantical argument.
Why do we have laws in America that say you can't carry larger than certain amounts of cash in and out of the country? Why do we have drug laundering laws? Because we know cash is a way to cover things up. That's why cash isn't a good idea. And that's why we have laws about it.
Well, I'm told that under the settlement, that it had to be immediate, that the payments had to be immediate, and wire transfers are not immediate, so it had to be done this way.
I've done wire transfers
This is what the
overseas
administration-
dozens of times, and that you can affect them immediately. You can affect them immediately if you do the job, the work between the banks. And it looks to me like the administration just didn't want to do that.
I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You come to New York, I'll buy you lunch, and we can continue the conversation.
Okay. Let me make one final observation. The American people are really fed up with the way we do things internationally. I mean, they're fed up. They have every reason to be fed up about the way we do things internationally. We make bad deals. We do things like this. We send pallets of cash to our enemies. And then we sit here and try to come up with some convoluted explanation for it, and we wonder why they're fed up with us. I think this bill is exactly the right thing to do. I can go home and easily defend this to my people, but I'd be willing to say I'll go to anybody's district in this country and defend this. I'll go to Mr. Engel's district, go to anybody's district. Because I don't think this is a Democrat or Republican thing. I think the American people in their common sense know that this was wrong to do it the way we did it. I appreciate the bill, and I think it'll stop this stuff from happening in the future. I've heard, okay, this isn't going somewhere, it's a messaging bill. Well, my God, the president makes all sorts of proposals that I guess he should know aren't going to go anywhere, but he still makes them. People on the other side of the aisle for bills all the time that I guess they understand probably aren't going to make, but they still make them because they have an aspiration to do the right thing. And there's nothing wrong by our House doing something that's aspirational for the American people, and that's the right thing. And I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Does any other member seek time?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the statement of administration policy on this, which is you would veto the bill. It won't get there because it's a one-chamber bill. But I would just say
Without objection.
to my colleague, yeah, the American people are sick of us based on the kind of stuff that they listened to in this committee just now. And I would further say to the gentleman that, you know...
Will the gentleman yield?
And when I finish my sentence,
Sure.
I'm happy to yield. And that the point that Mr. Engel made, I think, is a point that people of both sides of the aisle should heed, and that is on some of these difficult questions, we ought to come together and try not to introduce partisan bills and actually try to get bipartisanship and common ground, especially when it comes to issues of foreign affairs. And to be honest with you, I mean, I'd be here all day responding to some of the insinuations that you have made about this president and this administration, which I think are totally inappropriate and absolutely wrong. But the point is that on some of these issues, there are areas of common ground where people could come together and actually work something out. And that's what the American people are sick of, is that we don't do that. Everything is so one-sided, and I find that very, very frustrating myself. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
Well, I serve on the Armed Services Committee, where we do everything bipartisan. In fact, the National Defense Authorization Act regularly comes out of our committee by these huge bipartisan majorities, because we take our jobs very seriously, and I'm very proud of the work I do. I'm very proud of the fact that we work together with our Democratic colleagues to accomplish that. But I do get frustrated when the National Defense Authorization Act comes to the floor of the United States House of Representatives, and then it's politicized by the President. And he tries to make a politicized vote out of something that we worked on very hard in committee to make a non-politicized vote. So I think what I'm saying, the vast majority of the people in America would strongly agree with, and I would be happy to go and defend it wherever I need to go to defend it, because I feel that strongly about it. I think the American people do, and I yield back.
Happy to yield to the gentleman.
Yeah, Mr. Byrne, I've been here during presidencies, and the same Armed Services Committee that you serve on, not the people, but the committee itself, had the same kind of bipartisan efforts that were put forward. I remind you, sir, that we are conducting a war, for example, without authorization from this body. And somewhere along the line, it isn't just this particular administration. Before you came here, I made the argument, and I have witnessed, since being in this body, power that belongs to this body transferring over time to the executive branch of government. I don't like that, and I don't care whether it's Barack Obama or Bush or Clinton or Bush, or naming the last four. If you look at the line, you will see we gave up more and more of our power. The reason that we did was because we lack, L-A-C-K, political courage to do the things that we need to do. And then we leave whomever is president in the lurch, and they take advantage. And then we come here and we complain. By and large, it isn't just Barack Obama. And I want to end with saying how you began. You began by saying that this president, in essence, and I'm not quoting you, I'm saying the essence of what you said as I captured it, was this president is incapable of being embarrassed. God forbid that Donald Trump would be elected, because you're talking about somebody that can't be embarrassed. All you have to do is just ask him to look in the mirror. He can't embarrass himself looking at himself, let alone the embarrassment that you allege that this president doesn't understand. I don't know this president well, but I have every belief that his views are such that in conducting this particular negotiation, that they did what they thought was necessary for the United States of America, just as any other president over the course of time. Thank you for you.
I thank the gentleman. I just close again by saying I appreciate the gentleman's service in the Armed Services Committee. I trust him when he says things are done in a bipartisan way, but I just remember a week ago, I think we brought up last week, I had a bill on Guantanamo that didn't even go through committee that was actually very, very partisan. So maybe we have a different interpretation of what bipartisanship is, but I do serve on the Rules Committee. Yeah, well, that's my point, is that, this is where everything comes before it goes to the floor. I think Mr. Engel's message, again, I'll close with this, needs to be heeded. We don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. And something we agree on, we ought to come together and move forward. And that involves sometimes one side not getting everything they want, or the other side getting everything they want. But we seem to have lost that ability here, and that's what the American people are sick of. They just don't think we're capable of working with each other. And I think that's really, really a sad state of affairs. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there any other member that would seek time? I want to thank the panel for being here. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be sending you a letter. I don't want to take our time up any further. We've all had an opportunity today to express our ideas. And I want to thank both of you for taking time. Mr. Elliott, we look forward to you coming back. Chairman Royce, thank you for your time. Yes, sir. If you'll please make sure you leave
Thank you.
anything you brought in writing for the gentlewoman who is a stenographer, I'd appreciate it. Is there any other member that would seek to give any testimony in the bill that is before us, H.R. 5931? Seeing none, this now close the hearing portion of H.R. 5931. And the chairman will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina, Vice Chairman Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 5931, the Prohibiting Future Ransom Payments to Iran Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for purpose of amendment and amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 114-64 and provides it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Finally, Section 2 of the rule waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a two-thirds vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day it is presented to the House with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of September 27, 2016, relating to a measure making or continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2017.
You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Grandfather Community, North Carolina. Is there an amendment or
Yes.
discussion to that? Gentleman from Massachusetts. Right.
Chairman, I have an amendment to the
Yes,
rule.
sir.
I move the committee grant H.R. 5931 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor.
Thank the gentleman. Discussion? I would just simply say that the kinds of debates and arguments that took place here would take place on the floor. I'm delighted that we have such a motion from the gentlewoman, and I support it. Is any other discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the Mr. McGovern's amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Noes have it, noes have it. Accordingly, it is not accepted. Further amendment or discussion? Vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it.
Ask for
According,
roll call on that, Mr. Chairman.
gentleman asked for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox.
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Stivers. Mr. Stivers, aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse. Ms. Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. And accordingly, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Byrne, will be handling this for Republicans. Judge Hastings will be handling. Well, as the old saying goes, can't wait for the fun. Accordingly, the gentleman, Judge Hastings, will be handling this for Democrats. I would like to say that pursuant to what we've just agreed to, we are not currently scheduled to meet again this week. However, if there is an arrangement that does take place as a result of the CR, we've now said we would bring that quickly to us and for a vote on the floor. And so I assume all of us will be aware as things occur, and so would be doing that. Yes, ma'am.
I think Speaker Collins, did he not say that he hopes to do this by Saturday? That means obviously we'll be here for the weekend.
I don't know what it means. What I would say to you is that we passed in the rule the opportunity to bring
All
it
right.
if it happens this week. So
Fine.
thank you very much. Other questions on behalf of the committee? I want to thank the committee very much for completing its work today. And I want to thank Chairman Cole for sitting in for me last night. My plane was stuck on the tarmac for some 40 minutes, and I appreciate the gentleman from Oklahoma filling in for me. Thank you very much.